Welcome to today's Table Talks. My name is Scott Kappelman, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tyce Lawbinger. Tyce, how are you?
I'm doing okay. I let the dog sleep in the bed last night, so my allergies are really getting to me today.
The dog slept in the bed with you in Brooklyn?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it was just in the morning. Like, she was tired. Like, she was barking. She was hungry. We slept in a little bit. And so it wasn't all night, but
still was enough to make your sinuses or allergies to kick in. Not sinuses, but allergies.
It was happened a couple times since the last time I washed our sheets. So it's probably about time for that.
Okay. Wow. I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. It's my fault.
I'm happy that you have a dog that you have to worry about. It's just, we don't have a dog, and we're about to move our children out, so it's just going to be Kelly and I. I'm looking forward to that.
Do you get like a gerbil or something?
No, we're not getting any gerbil. We're not getting fish. We're not going to any pets. It's just going to be the two of us when that time comes.
Well, there you go.
So anyway, all right. Well, I hope your allergies will clear up soon. But we're going to move back into today's Table Talks. And last time when we got together, we were talking about the sovereignty of God. And we came to the conclusion that he is the sovereign ruler. As the creator, he has the right to rule over everything that we see. And then we kind of got into, there are two different ways to look at the sovereignty of God, that he can use everything in creation for his own purposes and pleasure, or he can have the grand narrative of what he plans to do in the end and give us choice in the process of getting there, but he's still going to work it out for his purposes.
Yeah. So always either working towards the future or working in the moment.
That's right. That's right. Now, what you did, though, when we shared this with our college students a couple of weeks ago, is you talked about the providence of God and how that ties to the sovereignty. So we put this chart together. So talk a little bit about how you came to that conclusion.
Yeah, so his sovereignty is just the right to rule. Like, kings are sovereign because they run the nation. They're over it. But how they enact, a king would use decrees. He would, like, nail this up on the wall and everyone has to follow it. And if they didn't, he would send the military and like they'd be arrested. Well, God, a little bit more powerful than that. And so God doesn't need to do that. God, his sovereignty is his right to rule. But his providence is God's purposeful way of doing that. So because God is all powerful, he can do what he needs to do by himself. And it's his purposeful way of doing that is through his providence.
Well, when you were sharing this, I always simplify everything into its lowest common denominator. So I said the sovereignty in my mind, the sovereignty of God is his rule. The providence is the way he acts. It's his activity.
It is his activity.
Especially in regard to the earth.
Yeah.
And so that's where we came to. But they're tied together. That's the main point.
They are.
And I think until you brought this up when you were studying and you talked about, I think I'm going to add the providence of God to the talk about the sovereignty of God. It just had not clicked for me. Those two could go together like that.
Yeah, and this is where most people get hung up on. Like,
you think more people are concerned about this?
More people are concerned about this because this is where you can either blame God for things or you can blame God the opposite for not doing things. Okay. I think this is where people get hung up on. We call it sovereignty because it fits under sovereignty, but
because it has direct relationship.
It has direct relationship
our everyday lives,
and our prideful selves want to.
Because that's how he's acting on the earth. We want to blame him.
Yes.
Or bless him.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Yep.
Okay, so when it comes to his providence, you broke it out. There are two ways the providence is expressed. His activity on the earth.
Yeah. So it's general and special providence, and these come back up, and they're both under providence. They're both connected. He works in both. And so general is just him holding the world together. The planets rotating around the sun, an atom molecule moving how it's supposed to, iron forming in the ground, gold forming in the ground, a diamond being compressed, birth of life. All of that is just how the world is supposed to work, and that's God holding it together. So that's his general providence.
And I'm going to go back to the same passage I read the last time. I think Colossians 1:15-17 is really critical for this general side. He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For everything was created by him in heaven and on earth, the visible, the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. That speaks to his sovereignty.
Yep.
All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things. And then this is a key phrase to get into the general part. And by him, all things hold together.
Yeah, so he's got the whole earth in his hands.
As we sang,
song.
You're the children's minister.
Yeah, so immediately clicking.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So because of his general providence, all things hold together.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
That makes sense. Now we get to the special side.
We get to the special side. And special, this can happen in two different ways. It can either happen within the laws of nature, which most of the time it does, or it can happen with outside of the laws of nature, which are his miracles. And so we see throughout Scripture, whether it be Old Testament miracles like the parting of the sea, or a New Testament miracle, feeding of the 5,000, whatever it might be.
All right, let's start with this, with the special side where he's working within the laws of nature.
Yeah.
The example you gave came from 1 Samuel.
Yeah, so I use the example of David. And so David went to go fight Goliath. And then the Israelites also fought the Philistines. But God didn't necessarily work a special miracle in David. David was a shepherd. And he had been more than just a sheep watcher. He had been a sheep protector.
Uh-huh.
And so he had fought a bear, and he had fought a lion, and something else. Was there a third thing?
I don't know if there was a third.
But the biggest two are the bear and the lion.
Yes,
and,
he mentions those.
Yeah, and David was able to very easily handle them. And so he had put his faith in God. Like, God, you have delivered me from the hand of the lion and the hand of the bear just to protect the sheep. I know you're going to deliver me to protect your people right now.
Right.
And so David just put his faith in God. And when he slung that stone and it killed...
Which was a skill he had acquired, probably doing his job as a shepherd.
For sure. I mean, what are you going to...
What else are you going to do?
What else are you going to do while you're sitting out there? Yeah.
You're going to shoot a slingshot.
Yeah, you're just going to have fun.
Do you have one as a kid?
I had one of the ones that wrap around your wrist
and
with the surgical tubing. Yep.
Uh-huh. I had one of those as well. Now, I did have one from the Smoky Mountains when I was a child.
Really?
My parents went to the Smoky Mountains, and there was a guy who handcrafted kid version slingshots with just kind of like a Y.
With the Y,
Yeah. But then later, because I liked it so much, one year for Christmas or my birthday, I got one of those that you're talking about. I think it would really shoot.
It would. Oh, yeah.
We'd shoot squirrels.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had these little ball bearings.
Yeah, we did too. That's right. So back to David, though.
Yeah,
so he's a skilled kid who understands how to use it.
He's got it.
Nothing out of the laws of nature.
Yeah, no. He picked up the stones, brought them, and he slung it at Goliath's head, and he hit his mark just because he was a skilled marksman. Now, did God work through that? I mean, obviously, God has been working through David's life to get him to that point.
Right.
But God did not guide this. It wasn't like a curved bullet that just David missed it, and God's like, no, it needs to hit. So he made it. I mean, David just hit his mark. And then he went, and it says killed twice. And so we don't need to get into that discussion. Let's just say it knocked him out. And so then David went and picked up his sword and finished the job. God didn't pop Goliath's head off from a little rock hitting him.
Right.
Like David ultimately went and cut his head off.
That's right.
And so this is David acting. This is not God giving David mighty strength like Samson had in that moment or something else. Right. This is just God acting. And then the Philistines, who were a mightier army. I mean, if you look at the Old Testament, the Philistines were probably further ahead in technology because God's people couldn't mix. And so they were probably iron workers, and they probably had higher technology and weapons. So they shouldn't have won. But God didn't possess each military man. He used them, and they fought and beat the Philistines in that moment.
Right.
And so that's just God working in the laws of nature, rallying his troops, and just they won. They won a fight.
Right.
So that is an idea of his special providence. They needed to win. God and his purpose, that needed to happen, but God just worked in the laws of nature.
Now, the other example would be he goes outside the laws of nature to make something happen that was not expected.
Yeah.
And that was the illustration of the people crossing the Jordan River into the Promised Land.
Yeah, and so I just wanted to use a different example than the Red Sea because everyone knows about the Red Sea.
Yeah, everybody talks about the Red Sea.
God again parts the waters when they're going into the Promised Land. They have to cross the Jordan. They send the Ark of the Covenant first. And so it's just God showing, hey, the Ark is special, like I'm going to get it through. And then they send everyone else across. And God had stopped the waters. It didn't necessarily say, it said it different. The Red Sea, it just parted, but it said there was water stoppage here and water stoppage there, and they even saw it in the river basin at the bottom.
Right.
But they just walked across, and that was an example of God preparing his people as there was a joyous moment of them finally walking the land, but also they're about to go fight in Jericho. Now, granted, they marched, but who wants to go fight a battle if you just have to caulk a river just walking across it? And so that was another example of God using his providence, his actions in the world, to separate the waters.
Yeah, his activity in the world, but he defies the laws of nature to cause it to dry up so they can walk across. I always found that a little interesting as well. This is a side note. Moses gains credibility by leading the people out of Egyptian slavery, and their walking through the Red Sea gave him the full authority as God's representative leader because the Egyptian army, which was their greatest enemy, was just defeated when the waters collapsed. Then, when he passes from the scene, as Joshua becomes the new leader, his first experience is to walk through water
That's good.
on dry ground, and he's not coming out of a battle, he's going into a battle.
Yes.
And so God confirms his leadership and his authority, his credibility, if you will, with the walking across the Red Sea. So just that's a side note.
And that makes me think of something else. So this commonly general and special is used with not providence but revelation.
Yes.
And so God's showing who he is. And there are examples of that. Let's say Gideon with the fleece. Like that is God sending a message, hey, I am who I am. Or God and the pillar of fire, the pillar of smoke. That is working outside the laws of nature for sure.
Right.
But God is not using that to his purpose for anything. It's just revealing, hey, I'm God. I'm here with you. I am who I am. So general and special is used with providence and in revelation. Yeah. Revelation, God showing who he is. Providence is God acting in his sovereignty.
Until Sunday night when you shared this with the college students, my only opportunity to apply general and special was to revelation. Theologically. I'd never really thought about it in terms of providence. Maybe that just shows my lack of study in theology, but I just never applied these to providence. I always applied it to revelation. So I think that's a really good point. Now, inside this special activity of God, the providence of God on the earth, then it goes back to the same almost division we had with the sovereignty of God. It's very similar. You've got meticulous and limited, so kind of talk about the differences here.
Yeah, so I want to go back. General and special, these both happen at all times. Like these are guaranteed going to happen in providence. This is where there's not a connecting line here. I did that on purpose. It's either one or the other, for the most part. You're
going to see both of these at
all times,
But at this point, you have to choose.
Yes, and so that's where we get into the debate that is very popular right now amongst college students for sure, but has been going on for 2,000 years since
we can't resolve
it. So that's not what we're here to do right now. We're just trying to discuss it right now. But meticulous probably lands more on the Calvinist side. Then limited is a more Arminian side. And so getting into it, we'll start with meticulous. Meticulous is God actively working in each event, in every event. And it is...
He meticulously plans how everything goes.
Yes. And so sovereignty in that side is God knows what he needs to happen, and he knows what has to happen to get to the future. And so he is enacting his rule over that. Meticulous as he is individually planning and causing people to act the way they need to act. And that's where meticulous gets in. It's the actual cause of something to happen.
That would go back several table talks ago. You said you had a classmate in college.
I did.
And she was in this camp.
Yeah.
And so every day the clothes that she wore, she felt like God had meticulously told her, this is the outfit you must wear.
Even if it's snowing and she's told to wear a skirt.
And a t-shirt. Yeah. And so that would be the far extreme example, but that's the way this meticulous side works.
Yeah, but there's benefits to seeing it from this side, because one of the benefits is there's no divine risk. And to say that God will risk something is very difficult to comprehend, because we know if God is sovereign, which he is, then how can he risk anything, which might happen with limited. And so with meticulous,
removes divine risk.
Because we can relate to it. If we are given a project and maybe there's other group members, but we're a leader, we want it to go the way we want it to go. Because if we're going to fall, we want to fall in our way. And if God, who is sovereign, knows everything, is an all-powerful, he's not going to mess up. So there's no divine risk when he causes each of us to do a certain thing. And that's what's nice about meticulous side, is that there's just God can't mess up in that moment.
So to go back to our previous episode where we started with the sovereignty of God, and I used the illustration of the former president Donald Trump. People saw that meticulously God caused his head to turn, the bullet to shade by so that it only hit his ear. But you have to also say the guy who sat behind him meticulously was chosen to be shot and die, lose his life, which is very difficult to say. But it also might have to backtrack and say that God meticulously put Joe Biden in the presidency the previous 4 years. And so that if you're going to take meticulous in one part of your life, you got to take it across the board.
Every part of your life. And so there is no going over to the other side in those moments.
You're either you choose meticulous, but you don't have any room for limited.
Which is why no divine risk is nice side of this. But the opposite side is that God is the author
of everything,
good or
good
bad.
or bad.
And because now everything leads to good, we can't forget that God
Yes.
is not just an evil God,
Yes.
and He's trying to.
He is leaning toward good.
He's leaning towards good. So maybe you just see someone like, man, they are just sinning. How could God allow that to happen? Well, the goal of that, in this view, would be for me to go witness. And so now God's given the glory. Because of this person's sin, I was now able to share the gospel to them.
Right.
So in all those moments of bad, God has planned that bad to happen so that something...
To lead to good.
To lead to good,
right.
Yes.
We do need to make that point. That's a really good point.
Yep. So that's the meticulous side.
Let's move to limited.
Limited side is a much harder concept necessarily to comprehend because it takes a lot of power out of God, I guess, is the best way to say it. God limiting himself.
He self-limits himself.
Self-limiting. And while that's hard to explain or hard to think about, we already have an example of that. And we see it with Jesus.
Yes.
And I think that it's in Ephesians.
Actually, Philippians 2. I was going to read that real quick because I do think that's a part of this. Verse 5, adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus, who, existing in the form of God, did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. Instead, He emptied Himself by assuming the form of a servant and taking on the likeness of humanity. And when He had come as a man, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on a cross. And so that concept of He emptied Himself, that's verse 7, that's a self-limiting decision on the part of God as He took on the form of Jesus to become our Savior. Which He is God in the flesh, but He self-limited Himself.
He did.
And that's where this kind of flows.
That goes in. So while God is not necessarily self-limiting Himself, He is just stepping back and allowing things to happen. Because God could obviously, He sees sin and He can't be a part of sin. So He could just nip it at the bud right there and not allow it to happen. But God is limiting Himself, allowing events to play out so that later glory can be brought to Him.
And again, His sovereignty would dictate His end grand narrative purposes will be achieved even as He limits Himself.
Yes. And so this view allows us to have free will because God is stepping back, allowing us to make our mistakes, make our choices, but He's still in charge.
Right.
And He's still going to work His providence to allow things to happen.
And here's the key, though. Bring this back into play on this side.
Yeah. So if you believe meticulous, there's nothing else that you can do. God is actively involved in everything. But a limited view, you can come over to a meticulous side for certain occasions.
And there are moments where God limited Himself until there was a need to meticulously take a step.
And so we can go back to Pharaoh, what we talked about in the last episode, and how Pharaoh made the choice that he was not going to allow the people to go. And then for God's glory, He's like, all right, if you're gonna choose that, we're gonna go all the way. And so that's when He hardened his heart. So that's when He stepped in and meticulously made Pharaoh now act even harsher and worse. So that way His glory could come.
Right.
So if you're here, you can never step there. But if you're in the limited camp, there are moments where you can step into the meticulous side. So that way we can fully see that God is working. It's not just an event by coincidence. This is God for sure working in that. So
that's right. So if you choose the meticulous view, you're pretty much set with that view. If you go to the limited side, you have free choice, but at any time you still give God the freedom.
That is true.
Not that we're giving Him the freedom, but you acknowledge God has the right as the ruler, sovereign ruler, to meticulously get involved.
Very true.
And so I thought that was very helpful when you put it in these terms. And that's why I wanted us to do the board, because I feel like until you could see it on a board, it might not make as much sense if we just verbally talked about it. So this is really helpful, and it's a really fascinating discussion.
It is.
And so, again, review. God rules because He's sovereign. His activity, in terms of His activity on the earth, is His providence. He's going to do it generally in all ways, like hold the world together, but He's also going to act in special ways, and then you have to get into the discussion of meticulous limited. Any other thoughts real quick?
No, I mean, it's just, this is something that you do, I think, in our just human mind and how we just can't comprehend God. Obviously, we think we need to have somewhere in the middle because God is just greater than us. But I think what we like to do is just compartmentalize God and just put Him in something that's easiest for us to understand. So that's where we get our camps. Well, this is just easier for me to understand. This is where I'm going to sit. Or this is just easier for me to understand. So that's where I'm going to sit. Not that we're trying to put God in a box, but it's just a way for us to comprehend what's going on.
Yeah.
So.
And I think another thought that just popped in my head. If you just look at our little chart, we're 4 steps removed from who God really sovereignly is.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's so hard for us. We can't even understand this level.
Yeah.
We're confused here all the time. How could we ever understand this? And that just shows it's greater than us. And that's okay. That's the way it should be. If we could understand him, then we would be God like him.
Yeah.
And there's just no way.
Yep.
So we're 4 steps removed.
Yeah. But that just goes to show like how important it is that we can know that no matter what happens in our life, it's either been allowed or ordained. One of those two things are going to happen.
That's right.
But on top of that, there's nothing that happens in our life, whether allowed or ordained, that if we don't put our trust in God, he's not going to work out for our good. Now, that's not a health and wealth kind of gospel message. Ultimately, heaven is the end goal. And so heaven and the new earth, or new life on the new earth. So that might be the ultimate good. Yeah. But if we put our trust in God, that's our eventual goal. So in everything that's allowed or ordained, God will work out for the ultimate good of us, specifically, and him.
Right.
Specifically him, sorry, us second.
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
That's good. All right. Well, we hope you've enjoyed today's table talk, and it again ties back to the previous episode. So if you've not watched that, we would encourage you to go watch it. And this is probably giving you some additional food for thought and things to think about and discuss with your fellow believers who have decided to follow Jesus just like you have. We hope it's been helpful and encouraging. And we hope you'll have a great week and then decide to come back and join us for the next Table Talks.